share what's really happening behind the scenes. I think it's so easy in the climate we live in to get lost in clickbait and articles and
Hell
views.
yeah.
And often that stops us from actually getting to understand someone and see someone for who they are. And today's guest
Real
is someone
talk.
that I've been wanting on the show for years. So I'm extremely happy and extremely present even more than ever because this has been an opportunity I've been looking forward to. Today I'm talking to the one and only Michael B. Jordan, a director, actor, producer who's recognized as an industry leader, invested in bringing social change to Hollywood through his art and philanthropy. Making his feature film directorial debut, Michael B. Jordan recently reprised the role of Adonis Creed in Creed 3. I'm a big Rocky fan, so when Creed dropped, you knew I had to see it, which had the biggest opening weekend for a Creed
How long
film
ago was this?
and biggest
1 year
domestic
ago.
opening for a sports movie ever of all time. I just need to clarify that. Up next, Michael B. Jordan is set to star in Ryan Coogler's next feature film for Warner Brothers. And Michael B. Jordan also was named one of Time's 100 most influential people of 2023. He's been recognized as People's 2020 sexiest man alive. My team went on about this. And one of the New York Times 25 greatest actors of the 21st century. And now he's got a new health drink out. And you know I'm a big fan of health and wellness. It's called
This
Moss,
is a great
the
little
first
intro,
of its
huh?
kind sea
A
moss
long
beverage available nationwide as you're listening and
Okay.
watching today. Welcome to the show, Michael B. Jordan. Mike, it's great to have you here.
Man, Jay,
sir.
appreciate it, man. That introduction is great. I just need to carry you around with me everywhere I go and just introduce me places.
that was
But no, I
perfect.
appreciate it. Thanks for having me, man.
Well, I wanted to add also, like in the few moments we've spent together, even just walking in, you know, if I can add to that intro, you know, extremely humble, gracious, kind, like thoughtful. Like it's also nice meeting that, and I love that this platform is a space that can come out. And we were just talking about that. You were saying that,
Yep.
you know, you've almost been looking for a space where you can share that because you don't do a lot of press.
I don't.
Yeah.
I think you know it's seasons for it. You know, obviously, you know when you have a project coming out or something you need to promote. You know, it's a part of that news cycle. But for me personally, I try to kind of say to myself a little bit and very cautious of how you want people to get to know you. You know, when you have opportunities to speak and share things about yourself, and not
real
kind of
talk.
be a part of sometimes other people's agenda, so that's but been a big fan of yours for a long time and the work that you've done and you are currently doing, and felt like this was a good time to to get out and talk and share some things about me. I guess
Yeah.
it's been a journey. It's been a journey. So this is a nice little check-in point, I think.
Yeah, I love
Yeah.
that. Well, I appreciate the trust and I love that check-in point because it must be fascinating to look back at something and then think about where you were in life, what was going on in your mind. So I wanted to start with,
You know,
there was just one thing you
the fact that he said it, sometimes I look back on things and be like, bro, how did I get through that, bro? Like in a moment, it was so hard. It was so stressful, bro. That's why I kind of look back on those moments and be like, bro, I got through that. This is not as hard as that. So let's lock in, man. You know what I'm saying? Let's get through this type shit.
said in an interview, and we were talking about this earlier, this idea of written versus being able to explain.
Correct.
And there was this great point you made that I think people wouldn't recognize with the amount of success you've had, the hits you've had. I think people want to know about you and learn about you. But you said, when you come from where I come from and everybody doesn't get those breaks, that luck, you start to question, why am I successful in life? Why did I go this way and everybody went that way? And I just thought that was, again, extremely humble and also representative of where you grew up, how you came up. Like, which way did everyone go and where did that luck begin for you?
I think coming up in Newark, New Jersey, coming up in that environment and, having, when you're younger, you're living life, you're taking it a day at a time. You're going to basketball practice, you're going to school, you're going to church, for me, it was, taking a lot of trips to New York City, going on auditions at a really, really young age and just figuring out what that is. Having parents pretty aware, and very present in my life, growing up.
Stuff, man.
That was rare amongst my
I've been
family.
feeling kind of everywhere right now. I need to lock in.
Having both parents that was there and very present.
I got a big move
and
coming up, bro.
aware of my environment as well. You know
About to take this to Cali,
being
bro.
told to look out for these things and make good choices, to be disciplined, to be focused on things. You know, get your schoolwork. You know, all the the positives in growing up in an environment like that. And you know, hats off to my parents and to sacrifice so much to make sure their kids, you know, were safe and grew up in grew up in an environment ain't easy, making ends meet. You know.
Real
Grew up very
shit.
poor but didn't feel like it, you know what I'm saying? It was very, you know, I
Exactly.
think they did a good
Moms
job
made
at
that shit
hiding those
work. Dad
things, you
made
know.
that
I
shit
think as
look
we get
good.
older, we look back, it was like, oh man, we went through that. Oh, that's why we slept in the kitchen that one time with the oven open, or that's when we stayed at grandma's house for like, you know, a couple of weeks when you know, so you get that reflection of how we kind of grew up. And I think for me, you know, always having a bigger purpose, I think, or just, you know, just that optimism, you know, that I was a big dreamer as a kid. And I think, you know, you start to not just to focusing on the work of it all, but since I was working such a young age, that's the thing that I can kind of point to of, you know, booking auditions and getting this job and traveling to this place and experiencing these things and coming back home with these experiences and not having a lot of people who could relate or could, you know, I could soundboard off of. And I think in feeling like that, you don't
Bro,
want
the
to
dreams are
alienate those
coming,
people,
bro.
you know.
I'm just sitting
And
here
I
thinking,
think,
bro,
and
like
this is all, I guess, in hindsight, you
how
don't share
much
these stories as
I
much. You
want
know,
this,
maybe you
yo.
should because you don't want somebody to
Like,
feel like inadequate or, you know, not being able to have that experience that you might have had. And I think, you know, that
I'm gonna do
snowballs
this.
as
I'm
you
gonna do
get
this.
older and from stepping stone to stepping stone
I'm
as
doing
I
it. I'm
continue
doing
to
it, man.
be
I'm
successful
doing it.
at a young age. You start to question, why am I being so successful? And the people that look just like me that are right next to me in these everyday things aren't necessarily doing that or not choosing to, you know, just didn't have those options that were
Yeah.
laid out to them. And I
Excuse me.
think you start to doubt yourself for whatever reason or feel guilty for the things that you may or may not have. Even though, you know, our parents were people of service, you know, block parties or, you know, cooking church dinners or, you know, whenever, you know, my house was the house that everybody came to at some point, whether we were going to get pizza that night or dad was going to take everybody camping or going to these things. Like that was kind of my house within my neighborhood and community. And so I think for me, being a person of service kind of, because, you know, it kind of comes from how I was raised and those are the examples that I knew growing up. I always felt lucky too. As you become more successful and you see less people look like you that are being successful in this realm, and you end up being the one guy that looks like me that's successful, or the couple guys that, or the usual suspects that you see in the audition room, or and things of that nature. You know, you start to sometimes question why are you.
That's
Now
why
I
he's so
can
humble,
I
bro.
feel as though it was my
His
path. You know,
outlook
it was my
on
purpose
shit has
and
never been like
spirituality and growing up in a household that was very
I'm
focused
better
on,
than you. It's always like why.
church and spiritual and
I feel
meditation
like that why is
and just
always gonna give
being
you more life.
aware of the world that we live in.
If you
You
continue
know,
to
I
ask
felt I was
why, I
destined
feel like
for
you
something,
continue to
not knowing
challenge
what that
yourself.
was, but just something.
Wow. Yeah. And I mean, when I'm hearing that, it sounds like, I love what you said. You were like, you know, they hid we were poor and we didn't even see that. But this idea of like, you sound so, when I see you talk about your family, and for those of you who are watching, you can see it on Mike's face, but there's so much joy and there's bliss and there's like a happiness when you're looking back on that time. Like I can see it's a positive experience because of how you feel you've been loved and cared for and supported, even though the resources may not have been there or the access or opportunities. And I was wondering when I was listening to you, like, is there a memory or an experience from your childhood that you think defines who you are today? Like, was there a memory or a story that you have in your mind of an experience you went through that you think brings out
That's
maybe
a
that
great
service
question.
element or brings out that purposeful element?
And I think this bliss and this appreciation for how I grew up comes in hindsight. You know, like, you know, the first time you have a moment where you're like, pick up the phone, you know, one morning, you just call your mom and be like, thank you. I get it. I'm
Yeah, real
sorry.
talk.
I'm sorry for being that kid at
made
some
that call.
point, and I'm so sorry for not understanding. I totally get what you guys are going through. Sheesh. I love you guys. You know, like you have those moments when you get older, you know, that you just can't really have that perspective when you were a kid. And I think, you know, I was very mischievous, you know, as well. And I think there were moments when my dad
Hey, that's
disciplined
set
me,
up
you know,
hard.
for
The
whatever
chain and the earrings.
whatever I did at
It's
that
like
time.
ruby. That
And then my
motherfucker hard.
mom
Look.
would have a conversation with me around the
earrings
why.
match the chain. That's hard.
And then being
Slight
also
shit.
forced or pushed and nudged into a space where you had to acknowledge your siblings also, you know, in that situation, and the importance of family and what that means, you know. My parents have different upbringings, you know what I'm saying, from, you know, and different family structures growing up. But one thing they've always provided us with is just a sense of like family over everything, you know, and how important that is. And that just kind of kept the groundedness to me throughout. So I think just the experiences of just family.
I like your point about hindsight. I've definitely made that call to my mom, for
Right?
sure. Like, yeah, I've
Yeah.
made that call to my mom. And we're around the same age. So for me, it's like, I've made that call. And I think I made it probably like 25, maybe
25?
26.
Okay,
It was
okay,
probably
okay.
around then when I finally made that call. And not that I didn't love my mom before that. Of course I
Yeah.
did. But
They
it
got
was
that
like
shit on,
that
too.
honest understanding of just how hard it was to do what she did. Because she was
It
raising
fit
two
hard.
kids. She
The
was
fact that the docs
dropping us
matched
to
the
school,
shirt
picking
is
us up.
crazy
She was the
work.
breadwinner of the family. She made us
It's like
breakfast, lunch, and
plum
dinner
type
fresh
shit.
every day. Like, and you don't recognize that as a kid. You don't realize the sacrifice, the hustle, and always making you feel loved on top of doing all of that.
Correct.
It's hard work. You said that now you feel like you've got to a place that it's your path. What was that switch for you that went from like, I don't deserve this, God, like I feel out of place, I'm lucky, to being like, no, actually now I see it as this was meant to be my path? Because I think a lot of people and a lot of our listeners will be there. Like a lot of people are like, they're making moves and maybe they're the first person in their family to go to college, or maybe they're the first person who started up a business and is an entrepreneur, or maybe one of our listeners is trying to break generational trauma and they're the first person to spot it.
Yes.
But then they all live in that space of like, can I do this? Like, am I the one to do this? And so what was it that made that switch from like, I'm not sure I'm the guy, but oh, it is my path?
It's the sum of all things leading up into that
Another
point.
great
I
question.
think it's all the doubt. It's the imposter syndrome. It's the blessings that you can't really accept fully. And
Man,
listen
that
to
is
other people
real.
speak who are successful, or you see examples that you kind of feel connected to, like, man, that kind of feels like me, or what he just said or what she just said, I
That is
resonate
so
with that.
real,
you know,
bro.
I feel like that sometimes, you know. Other people who are looking at you saying, no, Mike, this is what you have, this is what you can be, this is what you are. Nah, that can't, no, that's too good, no, that ain't me, you know. Your own presence in a situation where you have to step back and look at yourself and be like, am I this guy right now? Like, oh man, there's a room full of people who showed up because of something I'm doing, and they're in service or in support of my
Man, that's
idea,
real.
my thing. Okay, that looks and feels like I'm the guy. Okay, I'm in the industry where
The
you're
way
the
he breaks
success of
down
your
like
work and
why
your art
me, it's
has
not like
been,
it's a negative
dictated
concept.
and
It's more like
validated by other people's
why,
opinions.
like what am
And
I doing
whether
that,
those
that other people
opinions
aren't doing, and
are
what can I
factual
do
or
to get people who
projected on
are
you
in a situation
from their
that want to
own
be this.
individual perspective. I think it was a combination of all those things, and I've always been curious and walked towards the how do I make myself better? What are the
See what I'm
things
saying?
that I need, the tools that I need in order to improve myself, the way I think, how do I maximize myself, you know? So from, I think, getting an executive coach, who talks to executives all day and how to create healthy conversations, the right type of conversations to have as you're building a team around you. Because, as you know, it's not just us. We have an entire
That's
team of
true.
people
That's
that
true.
surround us that help us achieve our dreams and get the big idea done. A spiritual advisor, a spiritual coach that I have, who, helps me do my energy work, my spiritual work, and help sift through the noise and find those things. And I think it wasn't until I had, roles that challenged my spirit and myself in a real way that in the weight and where the attention was so loud that it was, you know, it was deafening, and it was, and I couldn't, you know, see clearly. And, you know, these are champagne problems. You know what I'm saying? You know that, like, you know, we're blessed. So, but the weight is so
Champagne
heavy,
problems.
you know,